Well, everyone, it is great to be back again. And this time I have a chance to sit down and talk with Ilaria Chan. So, Ilaria, welcome.
Hi, Tommy. So great to be here. It's a privilege.
Well, Ilaria, I've gotten to know you now for the last couple of years, and we've gotten together and met each other in Singapore. You are currently the group advisor on social impact investments for Grab. Man, one of Southeast Asia most innovative, biggest tech companies out there, and you guys are just doing. People will refer to you guys as the Uber of Southeast Asia in terms of what you guys do. You focus on advancing diplomacy, thought leadership, and social impact. In the past, you've worked with Goldman Sachs, you've worked with organizations, nonprofit organizations, all of that stuff. You're an investor, you're a speaker. Ilaria, what motivates you? What drives you in terms of what you're doing today?
Yeah, thanks for asking, Tommy. And frankly, I wish I had a north star and clear goal from the beginning, and that's my narrative. But for me, it's actually just living life a day at a time. I'm originally from Hong Kong. I've been schooled in UK and US, and the year I graduated Stanford in 2005, Steve Jobs was our commencement speaker, and at that time I believe it was even pre-iPhone era. It came out, I think, the year or two afterwards. And Apple was big, but it was never what
Mm.
it is today. So in my era at that time, actually the good Asian kid thing, obedient thing to do is to join Wall Street. And at that time, it was Goldman Sachs. So I ended up doing that, and I joined Goldman Sachs out of Hong Kong at the beginning, but my most of my career was based in New York on the trading floor, and responsible for taking Asian companies public, especially Chinese companies public. And that was the era of Tencent, Alibaba, Agricultural
Okay.
Bank of China, Yoku, etc. Which, needless to say, as a junior banker moving up the ladder, I learned a lot. Afterwards, I actually took a break from this career. After the debt ceiling crisis, I moved to San Francisco from New York. I volunteered with the homeless, went to culinary school, later became a motivational speaker, and I moved to Beijing and did that for a year or two, and then moved to around in Hong Kong and Singapore, and was much more focused on being a public speaker and also doing private investments. And joining Grab was a very serendipitous thing for me. But 3 years ago, the co-founder and CEO Anthony Tan invited me to join the company, and I did, and I guess never looked back. But that, aside from my role at Grab, my heart is really also in helping humanitarian organizations and helping investment and business organizations deploy their capital into social impact areas that can help nation build and help mass flourishing. So a lot of my time is spent on that right now. So those things make me tick, I guess. But I don't have one figured out narrative from the beginning. It really is just walking every day with faith and with passion.
Now, Ilaria, when you think about this, when you were a little girl growing up, was helping people something on your radar? Was that something that was important that led you to the journey that you're on right now?
Gosh, I wish I could say I was an angel from the beginning, but that was definitely not true. In fact, I think that most of my life I was pretty self-absorbed. It was very much about how can I achieve enough so that I my parents will be proud, people who
Mhm.
know me will admire me, and I will feel good about myself. And I think I just have to be honest with myself that even most of my career in Goldman Sachs was about that. But I think as one has their own religious beliefs, have their own faith, and more than that, you kind of tap into what is the moral bearing of your life. And
Right.
that took me on a journey. Leaving Wall Street was a purely life choice decision. My career was actually going so well when I quit as a junior executive director at that time. But actually, it was a hard time after financial crisis to question yourself. What is the driving force behind your decisions, and what mark are you leaving in the world? And that moved me along to countries, to humanitarian sectors, to realizing how little I know, to then asking more and more questions, to meeting people who really care, to not knowing where it will lead. And so I will say it definitely was not there at the beginning. And it is something that luckily from meeting very inspirational people. And frankly, being on the road is an important thing because it removes me from my own myopic bubble and allows me to realize how big is the world and the needs of the world. And then you realize actually you really need to humble yourself once you see what's going on in the world. And that just took me a day at a time to hear.
Yeah.
Still a long way to go.
Well, and one thing that you said is it takes a day at a time. A lot of times when I talk with young leaders or even people who are older, they want to know what path to take. What is it that they're supposed to do? And sometimes even hearing what you're saying, we don't know. Life takes unexpected turns. You're working at Wall Street, suddenly you decide to leave. You're working with the homeless, you take culinary school, suddenly you decide that you're going to be a speaker, you're going to travel, all of these things. You don't know what that journey lays sometimes.
Absolutely right.
Yeah.
That's the fun of it, really.
Yeah. Now, at the same time, for you is, if there was one lesson for those who are listening right now, as they reflect about that journey, what is that lesson that you learned about those unexpected journeys as you reflect back?
Um, I think the most important thing for me was that I don't own the results. I needed to make sure I realized I just have to be faithful that day to do the best what I can with what I had that day. Because the moment I had to control results,
Yeah.
that puts me in a very vulnerable position that will make me operate from fear, that will make me comply with maybe people and initiatives that I morally may not be okay with. It will I will be then also become very numbers driven. It's all about the promotion, the title, the exits these days, right? It's all about that. But if we know what we need to do is to be faithful with the resources that we're being entrusted with that day, that and tomorrow is tomorrow's problem, realizing that we don't have control, it really changes everything. And putting on top of that, if we are clear about our moral bearing, then we will know what to say no to. And that is actually, I would say, to every young person, especially in their 20s, because everything you say no to, you're saying yes to something else. And
Yeah.
that will help lead you to where you need to be.
Talk about the two industries that are so popular today, Wall Street, tech. Why do you think a career in Wall Street and tech is so appealing to young people in these days?
Yeah, I mean, I guess these days it's actually not even Wall Street. I think these days is all about tech, whether it is operating tech, venture capital tech, or anything related to tech. But back then, in the early 2000s, and of course in the 90s, Wall Street was the big tech of today. It's the Google of today.
Yeah.
And there's still a lot of people who are still making good money in that industry. I think that there's the obvious monetary return. Wall Street, you immediately make way above average salary from entry point, and you're guaranteed just a very comfortable life and exposure as you move up throughout the whole chapter. Big tech is a bit different. I think for tech, you really do have to bootstrap at the beginning, and you actually cannot be spending a lot of money. There's no champagne popping and five-star hotel business trips. However, because there's so much capital and so much hype flowing around the system, to be a founder and at some point, keep increasing the valuation of your work, if you have something that works and have backers that will fund your company, the potential exponential growth within a few years from zero to billionaire is totally possible, as we can see now. So there's that lure. And then also another lure is, frankly, when you just say the word tech these days is a buzzword. So it opens doors for a lot of people who are kind of second derivative people, right? They're lawyers for tech. They're communications people for tech. They are event planners for tech. I mean, there's a whole ecosystem that supports it, and everything we use is tech. So there is that lure. And nowadays, saying that you're a founder and an entrepreneur is a very cool thing. Back 10 years, if you just say you're an entrepreneur, they're kind of like, what? So I would say that the times have changed. And I think the lure are all of those things. Is the money, is the exit, is the increase in people's regard of you, is the doors that could be opened. And I think it's also meeting the best talent in the world, because everyone who's ambitious is flooding into big tech now, and back then Wall Street.
And Ilaria, you live in both worlds. You live in the US, but you also spend a lot of time in your Southeast Asia. And specifically in the case in Southeast Asia, tech and entrepreneurship is huge over there.
Yeah, I would say everywhere it is now. But right now, Southeast Asia is benefiting from 600 plus million people just mobilizing for the first time, a middle class that is growing for the first time. If you look
Yeah.
at the past 10 years, there's consistently way north of 5% GDP consistent growth in the region. And frankly, I think Southeast Asia is benefiting from the US-China trade war very much. So
Mm,
it is a very exciting place for sure for tech.
got it. Switching gears, pitfalls. As much as we talk about tech, Wall Street, all of that stuff, the potential for funding, all of that stuff, there are pitfalls in these two career tracks that you've had to face. Talk to me about these pitfalls.
Yeah, I mean, I think with everything, there is a dark side and a bright side. And Wall Street and tech these days, you're basically concentrating the world's most ambitious, driven, aggressive, capable people all into one place.
Mm,
And and with it comes all the great things and innovation and growth and money and success. It also will come the politics, the greed, the lies, and everything that could be distorted. So that's all. Everything is actually in this world has the propensity to be good or bad. And I think right now the pitfalls is to be a hype driven follower. I was talking to one of the chief product officers of a major U.S. tech company, and he is moving his wife and his kids from Silicon Valley back to the East Coast. And they said that, hey, these days a lot of founders that we mentor, they can't get out of bed if their company is just worth like $400 million. They will be in depression. They feel like they need to be a unicorn and at least hit a billion mark. Otherwise, they're not worth anything. Now, that is really, really unhealthy. And similar to Wall Street, I think back then when people feel like if their bonuses don't hit like, a certain number, they don't feel like they're worth anything. But goodness me, if you look at the doctors and teachers and now essential workers out
yeah,
there, like they work way harder and they're not being compensated a fraction of what people get compensated in Wall Street or tech. So I think that is really the pitfall, is letting your ego take control of why you're in the industry.
got it. How, in terms of letting your egos, how do you keep it in check then? What are some of the things that you've seen that allows people still to be extremely successful, ambitious, but keep that ego in check?
I think that's extremely hard. But the handful of people I do know who have kept their humility and all of that, they surround themselves with people who will tell them the truth,
Got it.
and not yes men. And they also are people that, whether they are penniless or they are millionaires or billionaires, their lives are not majorly different. They don't feel like they have to constantly upgrade their how materialistically they spend money. They don't feel like they need to prove anything to the world. It's really about the love of the trade. It's really about the best tech companies. They solve a certain social problem. It's really about that. And it's also about like the more you have, how can I bless people in the world by giving back more? I think one of the admirable things that, Bill and Melinda Gates, Warren Buffett, they do is precisely that. They have not become crazy extravagant people. I mean, of course they enjoy
Yeah.
what the comforts, but it's about giving. It's about creating value for everybody as you succeed.
Yeah. For you, talk to me about moving up the corporate ladder and some of the politics that's involved and some of the difficulties that young leaders are going to face as they learn to move up that corporate ladder.
And I wish it's no longer, it doesn't have to be a problem for everyone. But I think, anywhere with more than one person will have politics. That's what it is. It's just people and people, the friction between people in everyday lives, because we're all imperfect. Moving up the ladder is hard because there is this human nature of self-preservation that makes people, if they're driven for, especially by fear, they will tend to, there's a tendency to oppress people who are below you if you're
Mm,
insecure and driven by fear and doubt that your position can still stay if you lift people up. That's really a fixed mindset kind of person. And there's the people who have the growth mindset, which is like there's plenty of sunshine for everyone. I work hard, you work hard, let me lift you up so that you will be better for the organization, and I'm part of the organization, so I will also be better by lifting you up. And you can really see the incredible contrast between these two types of people. I think if if people are young and starting out in an organization, I would really recommend forcing yourself to grow in emotion, your EQ, your emotional quotient, to be able to read people, to know that which are the kind of mentors that you really should emulate and invest more time to build a relationship with, preferably really the people with the growth mindset, and know how to deal with people who have the fixed mindset, and the people who tend to oppress people below them or take credit for work that you've done and they haven't done. Identify those people and respond to them with grace, but at the same time, know when to exit and know when to allow other people to also be accountable to what they do, so that you're not stuck in a situation where they have sole control of your destiny. And that is hard. It's a soft skill, but it's important.
Yeah. Now, Ilaria, did you have mentors? Who mentored you as you grew up and rose through the corporate ladder?
I was very lucky that actually, even in Wall Street, on Wall Street days, my boss was this Aussie Caucasian guy who did not micromanage me, but really trusted in my abilities and gave me so much of the opportunities at that time that were lucrative, because he literally had that growth mindset. I said he was moving up in Goldman Sachs, making partner, and he didn't have to hog his account. So he was like, "Hey, I'll let you cover these largest accounts provided you do a good job. Now go run and own it." And of course, if I didn't perform, then it would be taken away from me. But he was very good at empowering women as well. So despite having people who are bullies as well around me and making life very difficult, I had a boss that was willing to give me an opportunity. So I was very blessed that I had that. And in terms of mentors, I do very intentionally invest and reach out to in terms of building relationships with people outside of my workplace in different countries, from different social spheres. So that has really helped me over the years to gain perspective and to also allow me to realize there's always another path. One door closed, another open. So I would also encourage people to just keep investing in relationships and build it, because it's not a one-off thing, to keep building relationships with different people around the world that you admire, that you think you can learn something from, and that they can tell you the truth.
Yeah. Hey, Larry, did you ever have to face hardships, whether it was your age, the fact that you were female or Asian? Did you ever have to deal with some of those things?
I think for sure, but I also realized that it is a very natural course in life to have those situations. I think in Wall Street, there were great people like that Aussie boss I mentioned, but there are also people who were impolite. There's definitely a lot of this Me Too thing going on, but there are also female bullies. I remember,
Mm,
who were women who were more senior than me, and they are insecure about lifting other women up because they worked so hard to kind of guard their territory, and they would deliberately make life very hard for younger girls and women. And so I definitely had the share of that. And I think after that, though, after I left the Wall Street bubble, seeing the world, I realized how hard everything is, right? I think, joining him, traveling with humanitarian organizations, you actually realize on the ground, when you're trying to help orphans, help trafficked people, help people in the slums, and all of the above, like, the problems never end, and there is no pat answer, there's no spreadsheet answer, and every day it's about putting yourself in the shoes of the people you're trying to help, and not assuming that there's a superiority because we parachute in from the first world. In terms of tech, oh my goodness, it takes grit, it takes skills, it takes tremendous luck, and so I think for me is to know that in one point of time you can be the star and best performer. In a second you can be a bottom of the barrel underperformer, and to know that learning never stops because of that, and your self-worth is not built on being
yeah.
pegged as, be the holding one skill, and to just constantly learn and be okay to know, to tell people when you don't know.
Yeah. And Larry, what you just said is so important. It's the self-worth. It's feeling who you are and being confident in who that person is, because you don't want to be the guy who's leading out of issues that you personally have that's coming out in your leadership.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
Hey, let's talk a little bit, and then I want you to share some slides and give us some thoughts on some things. Let's talk about the ethics and politics of these two career fields, okay? Just because I think a lot of times, can you share some thoughts on why Wall Street and now the tech industry can be hated by the public despite millions of people still wanting to join and be part of these industries?
Yeah, well, in many ways, the human beings were complicated. These are industries that can help a person soar. It can have a lot of career benefits. It is something that is essential to us. But at the same time, when we can see people in power abusing these privileges instead of using them to serve everyone, then you're outraged and you want to take them down. And I think politics really, like I mentioned just now, is just purely friction between human beings. And everyone has their ambition. People usually are self-motivated. They want to advance themselves, and oftentimes you do that by putting others down, or also by not being honest. And so I think to overcome that is, really to lift up the people who are positive forces in these industries. And since everyone wants career in there, it does take effective public-private partnership to regulate where areas where industries not regulate themselves. It's a complex problem, really.
Got it. Good, good. Hey, I'm going to ask you to share some thoughts, and I know you have some slides, so love to hear some of your thoughts.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for giving me this time. And really, I mean, I know the topic seems to be just about Wall Street and big tech, but actually it's just a title, and it's just also drawing on some of my personal experience. But the world is so much bigger than Wall Street and big tech. And I think these days, when everything is growing at just the speed of a meteor, there's so much scalability. There's so many ways that media can help make or break something. We just need to apply and translate some insights and wisdom into everything. So today I just wanted to show some short videos, but really dive a little bit into these areas in Wall Street and big tech and the public perception and controversies, and see what are some of the leadership lessons we can draw from it. So is it okay to play the short video on Wall Street right now? Thank you.
Since the Occupy Wall Street movement of 2011 gained national interest, Wall Street has taken center stage on the political radar. In particular, candidates Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton have rallied against Wall Street's disproportionate influence in the US and on the global economy. So, just how powerful is Wall Street? Well, in common use, Wall Street refers to the American banking industry. The term is used because Wall Street in New York City is the location of significant financial markets, including the NASDAQ and the New York Stock Exchange. These two markets are the largest exchanges in the world and facilitate the trade of more than $27 trillion of company stock. Changes in the global economy are directly reflected in the performance of these stock markets and vice versa. But stock market capitalization isn't necessarily a measurement of power, as that money is actually held by investors and not specifically by Wall Street. By comparison, US financial institutions hold roughly $15 trillion in assets, half of which is controlled by just 5 banks. That's almost the United States' entire yearly GDP, the largest in the world. So what does Wall Street do with that money? Well, a significant portion of it goes towards swaying political policy. A 2009 study by the Center for Economic and Policy Research found that banking deregulation in the United States was heavily pushed by banks themselves by way of financial lobbyists. Deregulation in the 1970s and 1980s was based on the idea that removing government oversight of the financial system would allow it to flourish, and Wall Street's profits would trickle down to Main Street. In fact, what ended up happening was that financial deregulation allowed banks and lenders to take on riskier loans, as well as to bet on the stock market using customer money. This all came to a head during the late 2000s financial crisis, where it came out that poorly regulated banks were offering massive mortgages to people who were unable to pay them. So when the housing market finally collapsed under the weight of these bad loans, it took down the world's financial markets as well. In short, Wall Street's practices contributed to the downturn in the global economy. That's pretty powerful. But what's even more powerful is what happened next. Instead of letting the affected financial institutions fail under the weight of their bad loans, they were bailed out with public money. The Federal Reserve committed roughly $16 trillion to the bailout, which was led by Henry Paulson, the Secretary of the Treasury. Paulson was also the former CEO of Goldman Sachs, which received nearly $13 billion as part of the bailout. Clearly, Wall Street has a huge amount of money, a huge amount of influence, and even former CEOs in government positions. So when candidates like Bernie Sanders promise to take down Wall Street, it may sound like a good idea, but it's probably harder than you'd think.
So as the video has illustrated, there are so many areas where people feel outraged. And one of them is that, looking at this diagram on this slide, it's a little outdated because it's from 2018, but it shows you the picture. The largest 4 to 6 banks, if you add them all up, their total assets is almost comparable to the whole year of GDP for the United States. And why were people so angry? I would like to quote a short article that was written in 2011 by this investment advisor called Josh Brown. It's titled, "Dear Wall Street, This is Why People Are Angry." In 2008, American people told that if they didn't bail out the banks, their way of life would never be the same. The leaders told them that anything short of saving those insolvent banks would result in a depression. Now, at their darkest hour, we gave these banks every single thing they asked for. We allowed banks to borrow money at 0 interest rate directly from the Fed, gave them taxpayer cash right into their balance sheet, allowed them to suspend account rules, et cetera, et cetera. And we end up leaving thousands of executives in place at these firms. Nobody went to jail. I can't even think of a single example of someone being fired. People resigned in Wall Street at that time with full benefits and pensions as though it were a job well done. The American taxpayer kicked in over $1 trillion to help make all this happen. But the banks didn't hold up their end of the bargain. They did not use well the second chance to re-enter society as a constructive agent of commerce. Instead of coming back and working with the economy, they hired lobbyists to protect their interests, and Main Street ended up suffering. Now, this is actually strikingly similar to what later on I will talk about big tech right now. But what was wrong, right? Why were people so outraged by these firms that they probably want their kids to work at, and they at some point may or may not have also benefited from the services that these Wall Street firms have created? It is really because of, here as we see, the disproportionate influence because of their size. The stock market screams, fortunes for the fortunate, and however seems to have left out people who are not fortunate. And if the people that you entrust your savings and your money, which a lot of pension firms, a lot of these big firms like Fidelity, Wellington, they're all pensions, right? They're managing everyday people's money who are being put into these long-only funds. If they're not being responsibly managed, then everyday people, the plumber, the teacher, the essential worker, all of their savings that they work so hard their whole lives for can just be eroded. And in 2008, the article I just quoted, why are people so mad is because taxpayer money bailed out the Wall Street firms, but they ended up in keeping Wall Street executives, who many of them were guilty to have caused the crisis, to give them compensation packages that well exceed what, $2 million, $3 million, $4 million. And whereas a lot of people are struggling to make the ends meet on the Main Street. And when people think about the misrepresentation of truth, which actually was the underlying problem in the mortgage crisis, right? They were overrepresenting the reliability of these mortgages and loans and packaging in a way where nobody understands what it is, but yet their life savings have actually been invested into this thing that blew up. People feel cheated. And this kind of abuse and power, and that perpetuates the rich to be richer, because you actually need to be rich to have this free cash to invest, allows the rich-poor gap to really widen. And I think at the root of the Wall Street crisis is we see widening rich-poor gap, and you see people who are smart choosing to abuse their power and their influence in their workplace rather than using it to help mass flourishing. So this was Wall Street, and let's take a quick look at big tech.
Well, the big tech industry is frequently at the center of controversy these days. The so-called FANG companies face criticism for policy, surveillance of users, and just sheer marketplace dominance. 80% of corporate wealth is controlled by just 10% of the world's companies, 10%. And 90% of internet searches are on Google, and roughly 90% of global ad spending goes to Facebook or goes to Google. The two companies have just about perfected the art of collecting and monetizing users' personal information. And almost every smartphone in the world runs on software that's created by Google or Apple. And up until last year, one of those companies, Google, followed the corporate mantra, "Don't be evil." The phrase now serves as the title of a new book, "Don't Be Evil: How Big Tech Betrayed Its Founding Principles and All of Us." Rana Foroohar is the author of that book, and she's also a global business columnist at the Financial Times, and she joins me now. Rana, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
You know, you followed this very closely, but I'm just curious, how did you decide to write a book on this?
Well, it got very personal for me. I came home one day and opened a credit card bill, and I thought I'd been hacked because there were all these tiny charges in $1.99, $3 increments. And then I thought, wait a minute, they're all from the App Store. Who else has my password? My 10-year-old son. Turns out he had been racking up charges in an online video game that is supposedly offered for free. But you know, you can download a lot of these games, and then you get in and you end up buying all kinds of things in the course of the game. And it made me start to wonder about this business model. And so I dug into it, and I found that really this is about tracking us. It's about monetizing our attention. And it has led to some of the incredible monopoly power, which you see in the numbers you just laid out.
You know, you talk about, it's so fascinating to hear about your son and that personal, the video game industry.
So many people have that story.
We do. I mean, my son is 8 and he's really into it now, video games, and I'm seeing sort of the addiction forming on this. But, you know, you talk about their personal data. They have so much information on you, and they're able to monetize it.
Absolutely. You know, data is the new oil in the economy. You know, as we shift into a digital world in which really everything is going to be about information, how much you can collect, what you can analyze, we are the raw material. We are being mined, we are being watched, and regulators are starting to realize this. You know, we're always playing catch up when there's a new business model like this, trying to figure out what the companies are doing. A lot of people are becoming very concerned about what this means for things like election meddling, which has been in the news, but also competitiveness in the U.S. The number of startups has been going down because these companies have gotten so big, and just the cognitive changes in our brains and how we're going to divide up this pie of data. Maybe we should be getting some of that value back that is being mined from us by these large tech companies.
A lot of people have asked that question. You know, will people eventually be able to get money back for the data that they...
Well, and California is already actually thinking about this. They have a plan called Digital Dividends, which is about really giving back some of that material. They're even talking about a digital sovereign wealth fund. So in the same way that Alaska or Wyoming have given citizens some money from the natural resources in those states, if data is the new raw material that we all need, maybe we should be getting some of that value back.
Well, you talk in your book sort of how you had big tech, this great shiny thing, and then all of a sudden it betrayed its founding principles. What do you mean by that in the book?
Well, it's interesting. You know, if you go back, and I chose Google because it's really the best 20-year arc of this industry, and it went from utopia to dystopia. But if you go back to the original paper that was done by the founders of Google in 1998, it kind of predicts where we are today. They talk about the problems associated with targeted advertising as a business model. They talk about how it could be misused. So I think people saw this coming, but there was so much money in this business that it was really hard not to pursue that business model.
You talk about the money. A lot of people also talk about misinformation, Google and Facebook. Can these organizations really self-police?
I don't think so. I mean, frankly, every time Mark Zuckerberg is on the Hill or giving a speech, it's clear to me that they can't self-police. We're hearing just today about some new scandals within Facebook, staffers trying to alert higher-ups to misinformation issues. This is endemic. Every 5 minutes there's a new news peg, and I think this is the new too-big-to-fail industry. I think that regulators are going to have to figure out a way to make the pie sharing more equal, to make sure that we're safe and our data is protected.
Now, this is interesting too, because we have now emerged an era of FANG, which is, as you know, from this logo icons, Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Netflix, Google. Sometimes they interchange and put Microsoft in there as well. But these are the big guys. And what is a little even more scary is that the market cap of the largest tech companies these days way exceed what the Wall Street top banks were back then, and in the trillions of dollars. And a lot of the companies in tech actually take a much shorter time to reach to that place because of the scalability and the explosive growth as well. So today, when we look at big tech, what's wrong? Let's see. Okay, big tech has a lot of enormous influence on our lives, right? We look at the elections, that was a crazy situation, the economy, and our minds. The marketplace dominance of tech, the screen time, and frankly, every one of us right now, we're using tech, right? We're reaching out for our phones. It seems like if we're lost on the road, if we don't have our phone, everything is over. But we can lose our wallet, it's okay. We can, lose a lot of other things, it's okay, but we cannot lose our phones. What does it mean? Tech has become a lifeline to a lot of people, especially during the pandemic. And it is a good thing if it's being used for good, but what other pitfalls does it open up to? Data abuse. I think people talk a lot about illegal surveillance of users, whether it is from the camera, from the Siri and devices listening to what you say. So suddenly you get pop-ups about a vacation that you didn't realize that you wanted to take, but there it is marketing to you. And also just normal data about your online behavior. People are really worried about the manipulation of users, how their thinking can actually be shaped by what is being fed to you. So Facebook is facing a lot of heat on this, right? Elections, the reds versus the blues during the U.S. election, because you're being perpetuated within your bubble. The thinking's there, and you just never get out of it. And the mind share, right? The amount of hours that we look at tech and the materials being pushed to us on tech will end up shaping our perception of the world. And addiction is a big problem as well, especially a lot of the ads feed are it's like a dopamine as well. Feeds are need to consume and buy, but also like the need for approval, likes, and a lot of other potentially unhealthy things that could come from tech knowing more about you than you probably know about yourself. Same problem, misrepresentation, misinformation. If anyone has watched the documentary Social Dilemma on Netflix, it is very illuminating, because many times when we think we have control over what we're reading, you realize that it isn't. It's actually being pushed to you because the black box algorithm that big tech companies have, they already analyze millions and millions of data to know how to feed the right thing to you to maximize profit for a lot of the ads that they're trying to push. So this goes back to the same theme, shockingly, as when we looked at the Wall Street crisis, is the potential abuse of power and a lot of the tech companies are rich enough that they could buy out their rivals to kill competition. We've seen what happened with Amazon, right? How they treat third-party vendors, how they gain insight into these people who are trying to sell things on their website, but then they learn the tricks of how to produce some of these products. They create their own brand and put it at a cheaper rate because they have the resources, and then they kind of kick out these people. And also Facebook buying Instagram because it was a threat, but actually it is an antitrust violation if you try to buy out a rival just to kill competition, because customers will not have the choice to choose. All of that. Where does that leave us? Oh my goodness. At the same conclusion, there's a widening rich-poor gap. On top of that, there's depression, there's teenage suicide, there's worsening public discourse, because perpetuation of unhealthy patterns and to have certain powerful groups or people or corporations having sole control of what's going on behind the scenes inevitably will widen the gap, whether in monetary benefits or also in information fairness in this case. So we are what I'm shocked when I was preparing these slides is that I was just trying to juxtapose and share about Wall Street and big tech industries. But what I ended up seeing are the same problems, just manifested in different ways, which actually encourages me to that nothing is new under the sky, that history does repeat itself, which means that if we are introspective enough and develop our wisdom and not be dictated and pulled around by what's being told to us, but we think for ourselves, we can actually beat this. We can actually help turn the dark possibilities into bright possibilities. I personally really believe that Wall Street and big tech are not all evil, for sure not, even though just now a lot of the points I covered may have highlighted what would happen if people abuse their power and influence. But that Wall Street and big tech, these are neutral words. These are just descriptions of two different sectors that have a lot of activity and a lot of influence. But ultimately, what we do with it is what would define the outcome. Except, for example, right, Wall Street could easily be, quote unquote, the chance for people to enter society as a constructive agent of commerce. And that is what banks were supposed to be, right? To offer financial inclusion, to give loans and resources to people who want to build their savings and invest them and grow their pie, and also to invest into businesses that could prosper the society, right? That is what commerce is all about. And if done right, you get the best and brightest into Wall Street, you can further and prosper so many different sectors and give inclusion financially to so many people who normally in the cash economy could not have. What about big tech? I realized that actually at its best, tech platforms can be the most deflationary, democratizing place where the voiceless can be given a voice, and there could be breaking down of barriers around the world. We've seen that already. But at its worst, a lot of the things that I went through beforehand could happen. So, what are some lessons that all of us could draw from observing the pitfalls and the redemptive qualities of these two industries, which actually translates into everything? I think that to be really aware of both sides, and to how do we steward each of our careers, right? We don't need to be a CEO in order to have influence. If we're junior, we would be responsible, frankly, to be crunching numbers and doing the actual grit work that a lot of the senior people will use. And that is really important. That's the building blocks of what happens within the firm. And as you move into mid-level, most firms are, the majority of firms are being made up of mid-level people. You are the ecosystem at which activities of operation come out of, right? And if you're promoted, then you'll be in a decision of a place to have decisional power. If you're not promoted, you will still be the primary engine to see how things are executed. And if you're senior, needless to say, then one decision you make can influence many, many people. So I think if we steward our careers well at every level and we build relationships and network with people inside and outside at every level, it will help us navigate and create and give input to what actually happens out there in the world. To have strong instincts, right? And to have a high emotional quotient. I mentioned just now, if you identify someone who can be a good mentor to you that you could learn from, versus someone who is a bad mentor or a bad boss and leads you into criminal activities or doing things that are abusing power. It's down to you and I in that moment to discern and say, actually, I cannot give this person blind allegiance and blind obedience, even though I may be promoted. I cannot do it, and know when to say no. That is a muscle of wisdom and EQ that is developed and grown over the years. But I will say, people who were responsible for a lot of the crises in Wall Street or big tech or any other industry, they rarely look like serial killers, right, when you met them. Actually, a lot of them probably are charming, charismatic, good looking, loved by many, because those are the people who end up getting tempted to inflate truth or bend the rules or etc. So be careful and really read into the fruits of people's lives. What outcome when work slips under their fingers, usually what happens at the end, and discern from there. That also is a different kind of discernment muscle that I think everyone, especially junior people, need to start developing at the beginning. And this is what one of my favorite things is, point number 5, is to be creative, because it's not that profit is a zero-sum game. There is a sweet spot intersection between profit and social impact. is not a lot, but there is. And so for people to make sure that your shareholders and investors are happy, because every company, a for-profit company, you need to make profit for your shareholders. At the same time, you don't have to build casinos and sell drugs and all of those things, or inflate your books in order to get profit, right? You can be building good products with integrity and with that could be of use to society while you're making profit. And so in every sector and in every industry, I encourage you to find that sweet spot that is the overlap between profit and social impact, and invest and love people, because today someone might be your competitor and you're very tempted to throw them under the bus, but tomorrow they may be your client or they may be your colleague. And so these 3 C's really reminds me of this revolving door, that nothing is forever, and hence treat everyone, even the small people, quote unquote, who at the moment seem to be not of use to you, treat them well, with dignity, with respect, because you never know um, where they will go in future. And also, especially to junior people, I really would recommend be indispensable, be someone who will be indispensable, be a useful, smart, creative person, so that the quality of your work speaks for itself, so that based on meritocracy, you are a desirable candidate, so that one day, if let's say your superior is doing something that you don't agree with and they threaten to fire you, you'll say, okay, fire me, because I am a capable person that will be desired in other organizations as well. That is your trump card. And that is the only way that would keep you independent and strategically sustainable, and to be able to know that you will always have somewhere who wants you. And if you always upskill yourself, if you equip yourself, you will be that person. And then it will empower you to have the courage to walk away when you need to. You will not be scared to miss out. You will not be driven by FOMO. You will not feel like, if someone smears you, then your career is over, because your ability speaks for itself. And as you invest widely in people during your career, inside and outside of your firm, people will see what your life is made of. And I think the last point I would say is constant reinvention, because Wall Street and big tech, all of this come and go. And the importance is for all of us to have the resilience and humility to reinvent ourselves and step back up and learn each day. So if we can really digest all of this, I believe that we will be skilled enough to leverage the great things that careers in Wall Street or big tech can offer us, but at the same time, avoid the pitfalls and not be a part of the problem, but be a part of the solution to enable mass flourishing. Thank you for patiently listening to me.
Hey, Ilaria, thank you so much for your time. One of the things I remember, I built cell towers for about 10 years, Ilaria. I still remember my first boss, and it said two things to me when I was a younger person. He says, Tommy, I'm going to give you 2 advice. Number 1, if you always ask your team to do something, work just as hard, if not harder, to your team members, and don't ever feel like the second thing, you're too good to do something. Those were the 2 advice that he gave me that I have never forgotten, because when you feel like you're too good to do something, you're too good to really accomplish anything, or you're asking people to do something that you don't want to do, the whole thing crumbles and it fails. I've never forgotten those 2 lessons that he gave me.
That's really well said.
Yeah. Hey, as we wrap up, final reflections for you is longevity for you. What has been a secret to your success? What has worked for you as you've continued to find success, not only in Wall Street, not only in terms of your humanitarian, your nonprofit work, now in the tech work? What has always been your secret?
Well, thank you. Those are really kind words, but I wouldn't call myself like success, because success is such a relative term, isn't it? And there's always people who is going to be smarter than us, and there's always going to be people who, whom you think you can never be like. And so I think the importance actually the first point is to not let our ego take over and think that we've made it, because actually I don't even think Bill Gates thinks he's made it, which is why every day he works with his wife so hard to make sure that his foundation is investing into eradication of diseases. Because the moment you think you've made it, you just stop. We stop learning at the moment our ego blows up and we stop listening to people. So I think that is actually one thing that has been so important for me, is to never think that I'm there, because I'm not. And then more than that is to realize that at the end of the day, if we're not of use to others, none of this matter. And I realized that too. It was much more of a conceptual conceptual thing to me years ago, but now with financial crisis, with COVID, with being on the road, seeing poverty and realizing how little I know, it is so important, because the rich people, most of the money, and let's consider all of us there, because we're in the developed world and we have savings. Once you put the money in the bank, it sits there. But imagine if you give $100 to someone who's starving in Africa or in Myanmar right now, that $100 gets completely deployed into buying food and essentials, right? This is the system of the monetary system. The richest people will have most of the money never being spent, and they're in the bank, and there's in the system, and rich people have been more than enough food. So what do they buy? Oh, maybe I should buy a yacht. Maybe I should buy a plane. But how many planes and yacht can you buy? So the productivity actually stops the more you move up the wealth ladder. I think what I realize all these as I go on the road more is that how do we make sure that the masses can grow, and how do we make sure, I've mentioned the term mass flourishing, that the masses are not just surviving, but they are thriving, that they are actually living a life that satisfies them, allows them to grow, allow them to feel dignified, allow them to feel like a human being. That actually has been something that weighs on my heart every day. And for everybody, it's different. I'm not saying everyone needs to be like that. But when I meet really impressive financiers, tech founders, most of them will share this view, is that if I'm not helping the people who are not dealt the right cards, right, that we have won our ovary lottery, right? We've been born in first world countries and allowed us to pursue our careers and all of that. Whereas some people, they don't have a choice from the moment just because of where they're born. If we can even help them a little bit, is not just benefiting them, it's benefiting us. It makes us a much more fully realized, truly fulfilled human beings, and that enriches our lives. And I think this ecosystem is such an important thing, because the more we realize that it actually blesses us maybe even more than the people we help that are underprivileged, whether it's through humanitarian work or business, then we realize we are not superior at all. There's no grounds for us to be arrogant. There's no grounds for us to have ego. We should thank them for giving us a chance to be a more fully realized human being with a more meaningful life. And that is the magic, I think, of learning about the world, of being on the road and traveling and learning, being a person who likes to learn, being someone who also likes to invest in people. That really is has been very enriching to me, because I am a sum of all the people I surround myself with in a lot of the ways. And hopefully I can also be a positive influence rather than negative influence to the people around me.
Great. Hey, thank you so much, Ilaria. It's always an honor. It's always a pleasure. And thank you so much for taking time out to talk.
Likewise. Thank you so much for having me.